Hey Degrassi fans! So as you know, I was given access to boxes and boxes of Degrassi memorabilia, and that included some unfinished scripts, just endless storylines on Degrassi that never made it to TV. And as a special bonus episode for my top tier subscribers, you're gonna get even more storylines in this bonus mini-sode. And first of all, let me say thank you so much for being such huge supporters. The people who are subscribed to these tiers are like truly the ones who interact the most, who are the most excited for my content, and you guys always react to whatever's getting posted on Patreon. Like, you guys are the ones who make me feel like I have a real audience that I'm doing this for. A lot of other listeners are just kind of numbers on a screen, which is great. I love their support too, but you guys make this something that's very real for me, and I can envision who I'm doing this all for. So honestly, thank you so much. But anyway, let's go through 6 more storylines that never made it on to Degrassi Junior High. The first storyline comes from the season 3 planning document, which included Wheels dealing with the death of his parents and becoming kind of more rebellious. Well, Scooter was actually going to have a role in that same plot line. His breakdown reads like this. Scooter continues to arrive to class at the very last moment. He continues to know everything academic and nothing social, and he's dying for an older brother. He takes an initially unwelcome shine to Wheels, who was nice to him one time. I think this storyline is interesting because Wheels was packed with so much. Like, his parents died, he got new guardians, he became friends with the bad kids, he went to a group home. You can very much tell that he was meant to be a main character because he had so much packed into his little description. But Scooter is known as more of a tertiary character who would only appear in kind of small roles. He might only appear in like 4 episodes in the entire season. So his outline doesn't have a lot to it. Basically, it's just that he's going to follow Wheels around when Wheels doesn't really want to be followed around. But this is an interesting idea for them to explore because Wheels is an only child and he's adopted and he loses his parents. And I do think him having kind of a brotherly relationship with Scooter would have done a lot of good for him. I think Wheels is the perfect character that if he had someone who was looking up to him, he might actually want to change his behavior. And I think it would be interesting if there was a moment where Scooter does something bad because he's influenced by Wheels and it becomes kind of a wake-up call for him. Of like, oh, Scooter, you shouldn't be doing that, and him realizing, oh, I shouldn't be doing that either. For example, maybe Wheels skips school for the day to go to the arcade, and when Scooter finds out, he leaves school and goes looking for him. But then when Scooter sees Wheels, he gets excited, and he runs out onto the street without looking, and maybe he could potentially get hurt. And I think something like that might paint that emotion for Wheels, where he's, really annoyed with Scooter, like, oh, I can't believe this kid is following me around, and then immediately transitions into being concerned about him and like, why are you skipping school? You shouldn't be doing that. And Scooter being like, I just want to be like you. I think that kind of dynamic would have been really cool to explore because Wheels burns a lot of bridges when his parents die. He steals from Joey's mom. He overstays his welcome. He's ungrateful. And, he's always playing the victim in this story. So I think this relationship with Scooter would have been the thing that makes it kind of click for him. It makes him take a step back and maybe see what's going on in his own life. Maybe we even see Scooter not accept responsibility for his own actions, and Wheels has this kind of aha moment, like, oh, this is what I've been doing to Joey, this is what I've been doing to Snake, and this is why my grandparents are upset with me. So sad that we didn't get that storyline, but interesting to see how they were going to use a minor character like Scooter to help support a main character. This next plot line was literally just one sentence in a document that summarized what kind of quick ideas they had for a new season, but it did stand out to me because I think it would have done a lot for diverse storytelling on Degrassi. And the line is this. It says, Yick has trouble dealing with the death of his grandfather. This storyline was in a list of other prompts that were kind of like really throwaway concepts. For comparison, one of the stories in this list was LD tries to legalize gum, which I can talk about Degrassi forever, but I don't really have much to say about it. I'm sure it would have been a great metaphor for something really. I don't really know. But Yick has trouble dealing with the death of his grandfather really stood out to me because we knew that Yick's talked about his family history before and how he came to Canada as this kind of first generation immigrant. And I think a story about the story of Wheels losing his grandparents is really impactful. But he's born in Canada, and the way he feels about losing his family and the way an immigrant child might feel about losing their family would have a lot of differences, and I really would have loved to see that explored. In Yick's case, he only has a small group of people in his family. He only has a small group of people who know what he's gone through, and I think we would have gotten a nice, cultural deep dive into Yick and his family history and how he connects with it. Maybe even resolve some of those early feelings of insecurity he had in that first episode where he lied about his family heritage and now he was embracing it. So I'm actually really sad to see that this one got scrapped. Yick becomes a really, tough guy character in the later seasons. And it would have been interesting if that was maybe prompted by this. Maybe we got some moments of softness out of him that we could explore and see him celebrate his family history. I'm up for any storyline that dives into the stories of diverse families on Degrassi, because we get the home life of so many white kids, but we never get to go home with kids who aren't white. But maybe this time we would have gotten a story where we went home with Yick and met his parents this time. The next story is one that I'm actually glad they didn't do. I think it's a little too far-fetched for Degrassi and not really based in reality. It comes at that time where Arthur's family wins the lottery, and the breakdown goes like this. Resolved to learn to manage his own money, Arthur takes to studying the business section of the newspaper in order to better understand the workings of the stock market. Knowing the ways of the world from years of watching TV, he also reserves to make darn sure that he isn't kidnapped and held for ransom. I get it. It's from Arthur's perspective that it seems real because he watches TV, but I don't love it. I'm not sold on it in the same way. I guess it kind of sends a message of don't believe everything you see on TV. But I don't know. I'm not as struck by this storyline as I was with Yick's, for example. I think there's not a lot of heart in it or even really value outside of being kind of funny and whimsical, which might do good to add to balance out those heavier plot lines on Degrassi, but I don't know. If they did it or they didn't do it, I wouldn't be upset. Also, Arthur does appear in the episode with Vula's diary where she's fantasizing about him and he's kind of her secret crush, but he basically spends that whole episode having his own secret thoughts, but his are about becoming principal someday and kind of ruling the school. So basically, I think they were really using Arthur to show, he's just this really naive little kid who's, immature and daydreaming about being the principal, worried about being kidnapped, and perhaps even using that to contrast against Stephanie K, who's only a year older, but is acting so much more mature and more of like an adult. But yeah, overall, not really sad that we missed it on this plot line. Could live without it. But I'm curious to know what you guys think. Maybe you heard that plot line and you're like, oh my god, I would actually love if they did that. So let me know in the comments either way. The next plot line is one that I actually mentioned in the main episode, but never explored it, which is that Nancy turns to drugs. Here's the breakdown for that storyline. Nancy is a prime candidate to get into drugs as a way to prove that she's cool. But is everything really as it seems? Are all those stories she tells really true? Does she really need that pack of condoms in her purse? Nancy tries too hard to be the cool kid for all the wrong reasons. Now, I'm a Nancy Kramer stan, and I would have loved for her to get more airtime and more storylines, and I totally agree she would be the prime candidate for drug use. Ultimately, that storyline seems to have gone to Kathleen instead, who pressures her friends into doing drugs and brings them to a sleepover. And I will say that episode of Degrassi is my favorite from the classic series. That episode with the sleepover and the pot, and the episode called It Creeps where Lucy makes a feminist horror film, those are my top two episodes. But I actually would be willing to give it up if it meant that Nancy got that storyline instead. I can see almost that same storyline happening with her, just with Nancy bringing the drugs to the sleepover. Especially where she's older than those girls, I think it would be easier for her to convince them that she's cool. And she already works with Caitlin and Kathleen and stuff on the newspaper, so I do think that would be possible. I also can imagine this moment where Joey kind of approaches Nancy and is like, hey, I heard you're all cool now and do drugs. But he means it in that sarcastic Joey Jeremiah kind of way, like, oh yeah, you think you're so cool. But the younger, naive girls like Melanie and Kathleen, I think they would be likely to take it seriously and be like, oh wow, it's true, she really is cool now. This is like our invitation into the older cool kid club. I can see them kind of having a balance between this being a really serious plot line about drug abuse while also making a lot of fun moments happen out of it, like they did with Kathleen's story in the end. This next story basically did happen, just with different characters. Tim was meant to be introduced in the first season as a second-tier student, basically meaning not one of the core characters and instead just there to support everyone else. And this is what they had to say about him. Tim O'Connor wishes he was more handsome. Concerned he's not tall enough, he remedies this by hanging from the bars in the gym. He heard this will make you taller. And as we know, that storyline eventually does get in the show, but with Yick and Arthur as they follow around Snake for a day, hoping that they'll become more tall and cool and attractive. And they actually started to flesh the storyline out a little bit more as the planning went on. Here's what they wrote for Tim as he battled with his self-doubt. Joey and Tim have known each other since primary school. Tim enjoys Joey's wit and manic energy and wishes he had a lot more of it. Joey's flattered that someone as bright and nice as Tim thinks he's neat and trusts him. They share a passion for junk food. So I think it's pretty clear that Tim's storyline kind of became divided between Arthur and Yick's storylines. I think it would have been really interesting to see Joey have this kind of friendship with Tim, especially while he was going through such an intense relationship with Stephanie K. Because Tim idolizes Joey in this scenario, and Joey in turn thinks that Tim is really smart, it would have been really interesting to see how Tim gives advice to Joey as he goes through this big change of, having sex with girls, because Tim doesn't seem to really have these social skills, but Joey looks up to him so much. So I think that would have been a really interesting dynamic, and we would have gotten to know a little bit more about Tim. And our final storyline is about one of my favorite characters, which is LD. So we do know that LD was going to try to legalize gum. We learned that earlier. But also, Joey had actually suggested that LD was going to be the best man at his wedding to Stephanie K. I don't know where that came from. Like, are they best friends in that episode? Is she just, really butch? In my opinion, she's a lesbian. So I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know where that came from, but I thought that was funny. But anyway, the main focus of this breakdown is that her story gets expanded, specifically on her anti-sexism patrol. And here's what they write about LD. Through LD, we can raise questions about some of the inequalities of the system, like the way boys sport teams get more equipment and boys sport teams get more than their fair share of gym time. We can also use Alexa as a foil. She may say things like, LD, stop fussing. Young ladies don't fuss. LD's main challenge is to assert herself as a woman without losing her femininity. And I love that, asserting herself as a woman without losing her femininity. I think that storyline would have been amazing. We do see a few moments in the show where LD stands up for feminism by competing with the boys' soccer team. She confronts Joey on the half-naked women in her locker. But the plan in season 2 was to really continue this feminist crusade and fight against those social norms. They even wrote on the side of the document, they wrote in pencil, it says, LD tries out for the boys' team, which we do see kind of later happen in The Next Generation when Jane tries out for the boys' football team. So that's kind of an interesting parallel. But mainly LD's story instead gets continued through Lucy, who does go on to take up issue with the boys' basketball team and does start to pressure the school about all those things they pointed out. They get more gym time, they get more resources, and everything seems to be about the boys' team. But you know what? Overall, I am curious. Out of these 6 storylines, which one would you have liked to see the most? If you were in that writer's room and could fight for one story, which would it be? Would it be Scooter developing a relationship with Wheels? Would it be Yick being unable to cope with the death of his grandfather? Arthur studying the stock market and getting worried about being kidnapped? Nancy turning to drugs? Tim's self-esteem issues? Or LD continuing her feminist crusade? I'm curious to know. Leave a comment on which storyline you would fight for. But for now, a huge thank you to Amber, Rebecca, Brittany, Emily, Gina, Hannah, Josie Vince, Julia, Lauren, Max, Marisa, Mark, Sarah J. Sawyer, Stevie, my best friend, Georgia, and Randy for tuning into this special episode. I am so happy I could share these extra special moments with you guys. And leave your comments. Let me know. Bye, guys.